All right, hi guys. Today you're going to be doing a virtual Igneous ID lab, which is very similar to your mineral ID lab that you did virtually. And so I want to show you what you're doing, and it's pretty easy this time. It's pretty quick, but there's some slight changes that I'd like to talk about. So just click here to go to your identification, and you will see that on the Earth Science Igneous Rock ID lab, you'll have this table, and this is what we're going to be looking at when you're actually identifying. Now, this would be worthwhile reading. If you read through here, it kind of tells you about igneous rocks and identification of these igneous rocks and what they kind of look like. In fact, if you look through here, you can click on some of these things and it'll actually tell you specific information. Like, for example, what does felsic composition look like? A felsic composition and an intermediate composition and a mafic composition, they actually give you examples of what that looks like. So felsic is lighter colored, kind of white or pink. Intermediate's kind of in between, like a gray or a white and black distributed evenly. And then mafic is very dark. Okay. Ultra mafic would be like almost like green colored. So really olivine rich. Okay. So those are the different compositions of igneous rocks. And then you also have this this thing that says color index over here, which basically brings you to the same page. So you don't have to click that twice, but there's multiple links in here. Now, texture is the one part that might be a little bit different from what we've seen on your reference table. So texture can be one of a few different options. Okay, we have what's called pegmatitic, phaneritic, aphanitic, porphyritic, glassy, vesicular, and pyroclastic. So there's some new terms that might be a little bit different from what your reference table says. So let me just point out what this means. Pegmatitic means very coarse grained. So if you recall on your reference table, very coarse grained is this right here. It says 10 millimeters or larger, like pegmatite. Okay, that's why it's called pegmatitic. Phaneritic is another term for coarse grain. And you can see right here, coarse grain is in the 1 millimeter to 10 millimeter range, which would be these rocks like granite and diorite and gabbro. Okay. The next one, aphanitic, is another term for fine grained, where you really can't see individual grains in the rock. Fine grained is here. So these ones right in this range, like rhyolite and basalt. Okay. Then you have what's called porphyritic. And this is kind of a new term that you haven't seen. It's not on your reference table. It's kind of a mixture between aphanitic and phaneritic. It's where you have some mostly fine grained minerals, but occasionally you'll have some larger grain minerals within that. And let me just show you an example of that. So you can kind of look at this rock here. So see how the majority of this rock is kind of that gray color, but occasionally you see these like black minerals in there that are a little bit larger. That would be what we would call according to what it says in this lab, a porphyritic texture. So occasionally you'll see that, like mostly fine grain with a few coarse grains in there. Glassy is glassy. That's no different than your reference table. Glassy looks glassy, and it says it right here the same. Okay, so there's an example of that. Vesicular is the same as what you saw in your reference table. It's got a little gas pocket, holes in it. Okay, and you see a bunch of examples of that. And then finally, pyroclastic. Pyroclastic is not a texture that you see on your reference table. And I think you only run across this once in your lab. It's like a volcanic ash that is going to be embedded with a bunch of other grains of materials that are moving downhill from like a violent volcanic eruption. So it's got these kind of textures to it. So you can always refer to that, and I would suggest doing so as you're doing this identification. So here's how this works. Let's do an example together. Example number 1. Okay, so you look at this rock, and if you need to look at a close-up image of it, you can click on this. Okay, so you don't really see any large grains in that. It's pretty fine-grained, I'd say. It's not glassy, right? It doesn't have that shiny appearance to it. So it's a fine-grained, and remember, fine-grained is what we call aphanitic. Okay, so we know aphanitic is our texture. Now, we go across from there, and now we have to decide composition. Composition is either going to be felsic, intermediate, mafic, or ultramafic. In this case, this looks pretty dark in color, probably in the more mafic end. Maybe you might say intermediate, but let's just try mafic for its texture, or sorry, its composition. So essentially, aphanitic, mafic, you just follow them, follow this across, follow this down, and that's going to lead you to this answer, basalt. Okay, so really, really simple. And now we grade our identification, and it says, congratulations, you did that correctly. And if there's anything wrong, it'll tell you. So you just try again. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to fill out your answers into your lab. So the composition, in this case, was aphanitic, and the texture, or sorry, the texture was aphanitic, the composition was mafic. Blue is composition, red is texture. Okay, and so you write that down, and then you write the rock name down, and you're done. Okay, so just be aware of that. I did put some directions down here according to those little changes from the reference table, and you're just going to do all 12 of those rocks today. Okay, and it will grade it for you, so I don't really need to check it over. If you have any questions about anything, don't hesitate to send me an email, and hope you guys are doing okay.